My son's room stinks. There's no other way to say it. No beating around the bush. His room is absolutely foul. If he was a teenager, I'd have assumed it was just a byproduct of puberty, negligent hygiene, and stale food molding in the back of his closet. But this smell is something much more pungent. And he's only 10. It started a week after we'd moved into the new house. There was no slight funk that led up to the stench. I walked in to wake him up for school one morning. And there it was. As I inhaled to call his name, the smell hit the back of my throat with such a force I gagged mid-yell. Being exposed to something so atrocious couldn't be healthy. It smelled like mildew and death. Tommy slowly rose from his slumber, seeming unbothered by the smell at all. I dragged him out of bed, my breakfast bobbing in my throat the entire time. "What the heck is that smell?" I mumbled under my breath. "Danny's stinky," Tommy mumbled. At the time, I'd chalked it up to half-asleep mumbo-jumbo, but now I'm wishing I hadn't. I grabbed him an outfit straight from the dryer, worried the clothes in his closet had been doused in the stench, and rushed him out the door to the bus stop. I had to find the source as fast as possible. I globbed Vicks under my nose, and the hunt began. The second entrance was no better than the first. I was only in the room for 30 seconds before I had to puke. With an empty stomach, I tried again. Aside from the disheveled bed, nothing seemed out of place. No sign of a busted sewage pipe, no left out food, nothing. I dug through his closet, his drawers, and desk. As I knelt down to check under his bed, the intensity of the smell became increasingly overwhelming. It was the carpet. Had I been moving faster, I would have laid my head against it to look under the bed. The thought of whatever caused the smell on the carpet touching my skin made me squirm. There weren't any stains or spots that I could see, but I was sure of it. I pulled out my carpet vacuum and went to work. The hum of the machine calmed me. As I pulled the machine back, the dark water settled, small oil cells forming. Yet the beige carpet looked exactly the same as before, and yet the water. It just didn't make sense. I dumped the container and set back to do them again. It took 4 passes before the water was clear. The inescapable putridity from before was gone. At the dinner table that night, I mentioned the carpet to Tommy. His eyes shifted, and his cheeks blushed, his fork making soft circles across his plate. I was completely sure he was hiding something. After some gentle pressing, Tommy sighed. "It's Danny. He's my age, and he's my friend. He said he has to sleep outside. And that's not right. It's cold out there, Mom." I tried my best not to allow the shock I felt inside escape onto my face. A boy, either abused, homeless, or quite possibly both, had snuck into my son's room the night before. That awful smell was from another person. I cleared my throat trying to push the anguish back down before I spoke. "If Danny comes back tonight, how about you wake me up and he can come in the front door this time? We can get him cleaned up, and maybe he's hungry. We can save him some leftovers. And call the police somewhere in between all that." But Tommy didn't need to know that part. "It'll be like a sleepover." Tommy grinned. "A sleepover? That would be so great. He could sleep in bed with me this time instead of on the floor. He was all wet last time. I think that's why he was so stinky." I grimaced internally. This poor boy. What had he been going through? That night after Tommy had fallen asleep, I opened his door across from mine and waited. I vowed I wouldn't sleep at all if that's what it took, but the day had worn me down. At some point I must have dozed off because the sound of Tommy screeching yanked me from my bed. The foul odor was back with a vengeance. Tommy was hysterical, and there was no other boy in sight. Still crying, I snatched him up, blankets included, and slammed the door before examining him. Tiny fingerprint bruises were forming along his forearm, but worse, his arm hung at an odd angle. Tommy quietly cried the entire way to the emergency room. I tried to ask him what had happened, but he only cried harder. When we finally got to the back room, the nurse explained that Tommy had a dislocated shoulder. As I held him while the doctor popped his shoulder back into place, he felt so small. After, when asked what had happened, I had no answers. The nurse glanced towards me suspiciously, before asking Tommy if he'd be okay with me stepping out of the room for a minute. My jaw nearly hit the floor. There was no world where I'd ever hurt my son, but I knew refusal would only make her more suspicious. I took a seat in the chair outside the door. After a few minutes, the nurse asked me to come back in. "Has your son mentioned a boy named Danny?" My voice shook. "He has. I haven't met him. My son says Danny is his age. I think he is either homeless or abused. My son said he's been sneaking him into his room at night to give him a place to sleep. I only caught on yesterday morning because of the smell. The boy reeks. I had asked Tommy to come to me if Danny came to the window again. I wanted to try to get the boy some help. I finished weekly. The boy I'd earlier been desperate to help had done this to my son. I just knew it. Tommy says Danny came to the window again tonight. And he let him in. He told Danny he wanted to wake you up for a sleepover. And Danny became angry. We're required to file a report on things of this nature. Someone will be in touch. The drive home was quiet. Just before we pulled into the driveway, Tommy's voice was as small as he'd felt in my arms at the hospital. Mom, he said he wanted to take me home with him instead, that we could have a sleepover there. He said he lives in the lake. Tommy slept in my bed that night, but I didn't sleep at all. After making sure every window and door were locked, I was left with my thoughts. Lived in the lake. My mind wandered to the lake in our backyard. Tommy hadn't given any kind of sign that he'd been afraid of the lake before, and this wasn't a nightmare. The smell and injuries had proven that. Something tickled my brain, something just out of reach. I hopped on the internet and searched for Danny, 10 years old, our town. The first search result gave me my answers. Danny Sanders, 10 years old, missing. There wasn't much information in the article, but then again, the police didn't seem to know very much. There was a picture of Danny. Dark brown hair hung across his eyes as he smiled, and just below it, a video. At 7:15 a.m. this morning, the Sanders family discovered their son, Danny, missing from his bed. Police are asking the public to keep an eye out for this boy. The same photo of Danny flashed across the screen, and if anyone has any information to please come forward. And now a word from Mrs. Sanders. The anchor's concerned face lingered on the screen for a moment before the feed transferred over. I nearly screamed as the video continued. My son Danny is my world. My only son. This woman was sobbing in front of my house. Please, we just want him back safe. He's a good boy. Please. The last word clipped short as I closed the page. I think I know where Danny is sleeping now. And I think he wants my son. There was no chance I'd be getting any sleep after my revelation, so instead I began to devise a plan. My first thought had been to call the police, but what would I even say? Yes, officer, I think the ghost of the missing boy who lived here before is hurting my son. Oh, and also, I think his body might be in the lake because that's what he told my son while he dripped filthy lake water all over his room. They'd think I was crazy, or worse even, involved in whatever had happened to Danny. I debated instead on an anonymous tip, but I was worried it would somehow come back to me. We lived in a world full of cameras, and few payphones. With all other options expended, I decided that after Tommy woke up, I'd drive a town over to buy a burner with cash. But there was something I needed to do first. I needed to go down to the lake. I needed to see where Danny lived. As light streamed through the curtains, I prepared myself to go. I tucked Tommy in and kissed his forehead. I was hesitant to leave him alone. But we spend our entire lives learning that boogeymen only come out at night, and in any case, I couldn't imagine taking him with me. He'd been through enough, and the lake was just a few hundred feet from the back door. Heart thudding, I set out towards the lake. As I got closer, hints of the smell that had soured Tommy's room moved with the breeze. Now, with the water only a foot in front of me, I could see what appeared to be oil slicks across the gently lapping waves. My brain began to scream inside before the thought had even fully formed. I had a sudden compulsion to touch the water. I took a step forward and started to lean in and reach out. I was so entranced, I hadn't realized it wasn't just my brain screaming. A strong hand roughly grabbed my shoulder as a woman's voice barked, "Hey, you got something wrong with your ears or something?" I jumped back and fumbled for words. In front of me stood an older woman in a worn Myuuji dress, curlers still tightly rolled in her hair. "No, sorry, I guess I don't know. Sorry, I'm new here. We bought the house around a week ago. I'm Myra, you're one of the neighbors." Even without having managed to dip my fingers into the lake, they still somehow felt dirty. Sheepishly, I wiped them against my jeans. "Well, I didn't jump out of the lake, I can assure you that." The old woman huffed. "My name is Susan, I'm the house to the left. And don't put your hands or any other part of your body for that matter in that lake. It's contaminated. Nobody's mentioned that to you yet." Our flabby arms shook in agreement with the pointed finger she'd been waving in my direction. As warmth spread up my cheeks, her demeanor seemed to calm. "Sorry for scolding. I've been hollering since I saw you heading that way, but I guess maybe you've had a lot on your mind. Maybe it was paranoia on my part," but her word choice seemed odd, and for a second I would have sworn I saw understanding in her eyes. "Yeah, plenty on my mind," I agreed. "Have you lived here long? Did you know the family here before me? The Sanders, I believe." Susan's stony eyes searched my face for a few moments before responding. "It's rude to keep an old woman out with rollers still in her hair. Tell me, Myra, do you have children?" "I do. A son, Tommy. He's 10. The hairs on my neck rose as I spoke. Talking about my son so close to where Danny claimed was his resting place seemed wrong. Like something beneath the water was listening, smiling with sharp teeth. As if in silent agreement, Susan's eyes shifted towards the lake. "I knew the Sanders family. It's a shame what happened. The first time I spoke to Jenny, she was standing right here where you were today. Has her son Danny come to visit your son yet?" Susan questioned casually. My mouth dried and my stomach turned. I nodded as tears burnt behind my eyes. "Danny says he sleeps in the lake. I think he's coming for my son." I couldn't keep it in anymore. I started sobbing. I spilled the entire happenings from start to finish. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it sounded just as crazy as it had in my head. Susan nodded gently, knowingly, and placed her hand on my shoulder softly this time. "Something absolutely is coming for your son, but it isn't Danny. Well, not exactly anyway. The lake isn't just contaminated. There's been something nasty in there since I was a girl. And a long time before that too. The house I live in now was my childhood home. We grew up hearing stories about that abomination." She paused briefly to spit towards the lake. "And how hungry it is. I'm sure Danny's body probably is at the bottom of that lake somewhere. And that's where it'll stay. It isn't flesh and bones it's hungry for. This is a small town, and the police chief is a local. I babysat him while he was still in diapers. In fact, he knows better than to drag that lake. Better to just call the kids missing and have the families leave, to be honest. They had another child too, the Sanders, a little girl. At least they got to leave with one. Others weren't as lucky. No chance you could send the boy with his father or a relative. Or maybe move." I stared with disbelief. This was too much too fast. There's nowhere else for Tommy to go, and even if there was, I'd never abandon my son. That's insane. And we can't move. We put everything we had to get into this house. What the hell is in this lake?" Susan didn't flinch at all as my voice rose. This was a conversation she'd no doubt had before. "An abandoned child is better than a dead child, Myra. But children have survived living near the lake. I made it, and so did most of my siblings. As for what's in the lake, we'll both need to sit down for that. It's a long story, and my knees hurt. It's rude to have an old lady stand so long. I have some things to get together first. I'm not sure how much it'll help, but it won't hurt. It's been a long time since I've dealt with that thing. It prefers children, and there hasn't been a child in my house since I was 1. I tried to warn the Sanders about the lake too, but outsiders just don't understand. I'll meet you at your house before sundown. Don't let anyone in aside from me. Enjoy the day with your son, and stay the hell away from the lake, and have some dinner ready. I can't think on an empty stomach, and anyhow not feeding a guest would be rude." With that, Susan sighed and turned back towards her own house, leaving me next to the lake alone. For someone so concerned with what was and wasn't rude, she didn't seem to mind being rude herself. I was desperate for help though, and besides being less than forthcoming about what exactly was after my son, she seemed to know something, and maybe, hopefully, she seemed willing to help. I swiftly walked back up to my house with the tickle of eyes watching me between my shoulder blades. Tommy's eyes were just fluttering open as I stepped back into my room to check on him. We spent our morning eating breakfast in bed and watching movies. The afternoon was spent on video games and hide and seek through the house. This was what the new house was supposed to be for us. A new life away from the big city and poverty, one where I could watch my son grow up. I wanted to make this house like a womb and seal us away from the insanity that had invaded our dream. Over the sounds of Tommy's giggling, the light rapping on the door was nearly drowned out. As I headed to the door, the light rapping turned to a knock and then a pound. Susan, I assumed, was impatient. I unlocked the deadbolt and reached to unlock the knob when my hand froze. I could hear Susan's warning from this morning in my head, "Don't let anyone in aside from me." Did that mean I should expect someone else to knock? I brought my eye to the peephole, but it appeared to have been painted over. Frustration swept over me for not thinking to check such an important detail before being in a position to need it. I tried to keep my voice steady, but failed. "Who is it?" The pounding finally stopped. "Hi, it's Sarah. Can Tommy come out and play, please?" A small voice tinkled from the other side of the door. I turned to Tommy, who had hidden himself behind me, keeping one of my legs in a death grip. "Do you know a Sarah from school?" I whispered. Tommy, white as a sheet, shook his head violently. The pounding at the door began again. "I don't think right now is a good time, Sarah." The banging again stopped. "You'll have to go now. Tommy isn't feeling well." My chest hurt from holding in a sob, but I couldn't let Tommy know how afraid I was. I had to be strong for him, but me and Danny wanted to play with him. "We love making friends. We'll see you both real soon though. Tell Susie I said hi, would ya? Tell her I'll see her real soon too." I pulled the curtains back in time to see a small girl with 2 blonde plaits bouncing as she skipped around the corner and towards the back of the house. Tommy cried out as I ran towards the back window, but I had to know for sure she was heading where I thought she was. I pulled back the curtains just in time to see her skip through the back half of my yard, her knee-length pink dress floating behind her. As she reached the edge of the lake, she turned around and started to wave. At first, I blinked furiously as the small girl stretched taller, positive the light coming off the lake was messing with my eyes. Then I kept my eyes open until they burned. The girl's hair was becoming darker, longer, her dress melting in with her skin until I wasn't even sure I was looking at a person anymore. And then all at once she melted like thick black oil into the lake. Tommy, and I didn't laugh or play anymore after that. We sat on the couch quietly, his head in my lap, while we waited for Susan to arrive. The last bit of light was just lingering in the sky, when there was another knock at the door. Fear catapulted itself across Tommy's face, but I was sure it was Susan this time. Still, Sarah's blonde plaits bouncing as she gleefully skipped to the lake played in my mind. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated and peeked through the curtains first to be sure. Susan stood on the doorstep in all her neatly curled glory, impatiently tapping her foot. I ushered her in quickly, shooting glances in both directions, before slamming the door shut behind her. The smell of the lasagna I'd slopped together went through the air. Susan sniffed deeply, but said nothing. She lugged a large bag over her shoulder and heaved it onto the kitchen table with a loud thump. Her eyes softened as she glanced at Tommy sitting frightened at the table and then to me. I was too worn from the day and surprised by Susan's entrance to form even a greeting that would coherently translate from brain to mouth. Susan cleared her throat. "Well, I see it was too much to expect the food on the plates, but at least you've made something. My entire life was falling apart, my son wasn't safe, and my sanity felt at risk. But of course the old bat was worried about food." Susan sat next to Tommy. As I grabbed a plate, tensely I asked, "Who's Sarah?" Susan stiffened as she side-eyed me. "Where did you hear that name? I truly hope you weren't snooping it." I cut her off, tired of endlessly being chastised about manners when everything about the last 48 hours felt like a fever dream. "She came to the door before you got here. She was looking for Tommy. She said to tell you hi, and that she'd be seeing all of us soon." Then she skipped back to the lake and melted into it. As hysteria edged in, an accusatory tone began to take over. I knew none of what was happening to Tommy was Susan's fault, and I understood why she hadn't come to the doorstep on move-in day with a pie and a crazy story, but I was just so angry. Susan roughly smacked her hands on the table. "Language," she bellowed, "it's rude to swear at your elders." The deep crimson spreading across her pale, wrinkled cheeks made her look as if she'd been slapped. She took a few deep breaths and continued, "I told you earlier most of my siblings had survived. Well, Sarah didn't. She was the youngest. That thing used to wear her face and skip around the yard. It would stick her tongue at us through the windows, thumbs in her ears with wiggling fingers to taunt us after it had taken her. It would sing in her voice and call for us to come out to play. We never stepped foot in that yard again as children. My mother made sure of it. Once it realized it wouldn't be getting any more of us, it was angry. It decided to play a trick on my mother. She only saw that thing wear Sarah's face once, and it was enough for her to put my father's shotgun in her mouth. If it came to see you instead of just your son, something really, really bad is headed our way. My fear gave way to a gag, but Susan didn't notice. Her eyes were on Tommy. This isn't a story for kids, she continued, but given that it's dark now, the best place for him to be is with us. We'll all be staying in the living room tonight. How kind of you to come in and take over my house, I muttered. I think you mean how kind of me to give you a chance to save your son, Susan retorted. My eyes shot down with embarrassment, anger giving way to hopelessness. She was right, I couldn't do this alone, and it wasn't her fault. After a few moments of staring intensely, Susan dug in her bag and pulled out a large book. She opened the first few pages to what looked like family photographs, and her eyes dragging slowly from picture to picture. As if suddenly remembering she wasn't alone, she cleared her throat. This, she said, pointing to one of the pictures, was my sister Sarah. The photo looked exactly like the girl who'd come to my door earlier, down to the dress and blonde plaits. It was her birthday. Her voice trailed off. That's the girl who came this afternoon, I confirmed. It was, and it wasn't, Susan softly replied. She took one last long look at the picture and turned the page. The rest are mostly bits of news articles from missing children, children who were unfortunate enough to be too close to the lake. Others are historical articles of the area, and a bit of folklore. If you want to understand what exactly is after your son, you can read through this. And Tommy, you stay away from this book. It's not meant for kids. With that, she slid the book towards me and I set her dinner plate in its place. Later that night, as Susan snored on the recliner a few feet from me, I got to reading. Tommy was curled up like a cat on the couch, sleeping peacefully long before Susan and I were ready to retire, so I offered to make a pallet on the floor. There was plenty of room to spread out and take notes. The book was large, but most of the pages weren't entirely filled. Some only had one small, snipped article centered on the page. Others looked like a child's collage. Children had been going missing near the lake for well over a century. How the FBI hadn't suspected a serial killer or something in Moveton was beyond me. I thought of waking Susan to ask, but when I looked up, I noticed the drool glistening on the corner of her left lip and decided to make a note to ask tomorrow. As I delved further into the book, news articles and handwritten lore scrawled almost illegibly on notebook paper began appearing on the same page. I was so enveloped in my research, the creak of a door deeper into the house caught me entirely off guard. I stifled a scream as I looked at the couch. Tommy was gone. Quickly I jumped to my feet and lightly tapped on the bathroom door. For the sake of my sanity, he had to be there. Yes, his small voice answered. I pushed out a large sigh of relief. Nothing, just checking on you. I laid my hand against the door as if to feel his presence before heading back to my book. After a few more pages, I think I finally understood what Susan believed was in the lake. The book claimed in 1,800 seconds, when the town was just starting to come together, a small cult was discovered. Jeremiah Roller, the cult leader, had amassed just 2 followers. He had convinced them by maintaining a pure diet of children, the group would not just be consuming their bodies, but also be their innocents, also referred to in the sloppily written notes as souls. According to Roller, the more innocents eaten, the more pure their souls would become. This, according to Roller, was the secret to salvation. When not immediately discovered, the trio became sloppy. They decided they could eat more slowly. One early morning while his captors were sleeping, a child escaped. He made it into the town and told the crowd what had happened to him. A group of angry men quickly found and hanged the followers, but believed Roller was deserving of a more severe punishment. The men first beat him with fists, but Roller only laughed. Then they grabbed stones. Roller's laughter turned into the cackles of a lunatic. As mob mentality grows, so does brutality. They forced hot tar down Roller's throat. Only then did the laughter cease, replaced by a constant, thick gurgling. 2 of the men set out alone on a boat, rowed the dying cult leader into the center of the lake, and dropped Roller off the side to drown. A week later, the first child disappeared, and then a second, and then another little girl. She swore she saw her sister walking hand in hand with one of the missing children towards the lake. As I finished the last article, I tucked my head between my knees, clutched myself with my arms, and began to sob. How could I possibly save my son from something like this? How many others had tried and failed? It was all too much. I hadn't realized how loudly I'd been crying until I felt Susan's arms around me. There, she shushed. Suddenly I felt her stiffen. Where's Tommy? He went to the bathroom. My voice trailed off. How long had it been? Long enough I'd finished more than a page. Terror struck me as I leapt from the floor, in Susan's grasp, and through the bathroom, flung the door so hard it slammed into the wall. The white ruffled curtains danced gently in the breeze that flowed through the open window. Tommy was gone. Susan ran in behind me as I screamed. That moment felt never-ending. I knew in my soul that if there was a hell, it would be the moment the door hit the wall. And I saw an empty bathroom. The moment I heard screaming, and my brain wouldn't let me understand that it was coming from my own mouth. Susan broke me out of my trance, grabbing a handful of my hair and dragging me back to the living room. You run right now towards that lake. We might not be too late yet, but we will be if you don't cut your freaking out, Susan spat sternly. I had no time to even register she'd used foul language. I spun on my heels and ran. Just a short distance ahead through the darkness, I could make out two children holding hands, walking slowly towards the lake, and most visible detail being two blonde plates. My bare feet flew across the wet grass, and once threatened to slip. I caught my footing as my breath hitched. I was close enough now to see Sarah and Tommy clearly, their pace unaffected by my advancing. When I was nearly close enough to grab Tommy, something bright screamed past my left side and slammed into the back of Sarah's head. I didn't take even a second to try to understand what had happened. I snatched Tommy, the thing wearing Sarah's face turned towards me. Her jaw unhinged unnaturally, showing far too many teeth, and let out a screech so high-pitched my eardrums painfully vibrated in protest. A second screaming bolt of light flew directly into her mouth. Fireworks. With a now internal blow, the thing began to simultaneously stretch and melt as it oozed back towards the lake. I didn't hesitate any longer. I ran as fast as I could back to the house, the smell of gunpowder from the bottle rocket becoming stronger. Crazy-ass Susan was doing her own form of warfare against the monster, and while she'd nearly killed me and my son, it had worked. Not entirely, but enough that Tommy was safe, albeit a small singed patch of hair on his head, and in my arms for the moment. As I attempted to console Tommy, Susan made sure all locks were secured on all windows and doors. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Tommy hiccuped through tears. She said if I didn't come she was going to come inside and kill you. "We're fine." "Tommy, you're fine," I whispered over and over until he settled. Susan sat calmly on the recliner, waiting patiently for our moment to pass. "Sun should be up soon and we'll need to get to work. Rest a little now, we'll all need it." Goosebumps spread across my body at Susan's words. In cool tone, "Get to work." "Oh, absolutely," Susan lightly chuckled. "We're going to kill it." After my earlier adrenaline overdose, I couldn't imagine getting any rest. Somehow though, sleep found me with Tommy wrapped safely in my arms. After what must have been several hours, I awoke to hushed voices coming from my kitchen. I gently slid Tommy onto the couch to investigate. "This is the last of it. I can't be any more involved than this. Susan, I could be defrocked. I wish I could do more," a man's voice whispered. "Well," Susan whispered back, "it isn't as if I plan to write the Pope and let him know we're blessing more than water here in Riverbend. And there is one more thing you could do, Father. You could take the boy to the church. Keep him there with you until it's done. And what if it doesn't work? What if you don't come back? What would happen to the boy then?" Furious, I stormed into the kitchen. The nerve of this crazy woman to try to make plans for my son without me. My anger took a sharp turn as I entered. Susan stood on one side of the counter, and a man who couldn't have been much older than myself stood on the other side. He was dressed like a priest, collar and all. But that isn't what stole my fury. It was the 6 Molotov cocktails sitting on my counter. "What the hell is happening?" I shrieked. "Shush," Susan spat sharply. "You'll wake Tommy. And now isn't the time. I told you before it's rude to snoop." And what about my son? You really think I'd let you ship him off with a stranger? What is the matter with you? I was angrier than I'd ever been, but worse, I was terrified. I was to the point of waking Tommy, getting in my car, and driving until the wheels fell off. If only we'd had somewhere to go. This is Father Tanner. He's no stranger, at least not to me. And you don't have much choice left but to trust me, Myra. We're going to end this once and for all, but we can't do that with Tommy underfoot. It's too dangerous for him to be here. I was angry, but she was right. With nowhere to go and no one else to trust, I had to keep Tommy safe. I want to know what's going on. No more half stories, Susan. I have to know that what we're doing is going to save my son. Internally, I cursed the tears leaking from my eyes. I didn't feel like a monster slayer or even a good mother. I felt weak, powerless, hopeless. Tommy needs to be out of the house. Father Tanner blessed these. She gestured towards the cocktails on the counter, and we're going to use them to kill Roller. With holy fire, we're going to purify the lake of that bastard Roller once and for all. I have a small boat, not too small, big enough for two. We're going to row out to the lake, right where they threw his body. It's where Roller is the most whole, but also where he's strongest. And we're going to light him up. I don't know what he is, Myra, not really. I don't think there's any bones left to burn. But I know what he is, mostly that nasty, smelly, oily crap that floats on the lake. This is our only shot. In that moment, I hated myself. I'd entrusted my son's safety and ultimately his life with a crazy and possibly senile old woman. I'd failed my son. He was going to be dragged into that lake by Roller, and it was my fault. All my fault. The priest must have seen the disbelief on my face, because slowly and gently, he took my hand. Our eyes met, and in his eyes, I saw lucidity and kindness, but mostly pain. I'm not from here either, Myra. I was sent to replace Father Tom. He'd served this town well for a long time, but he was old. Time comes for us all. A sad smile touched the priest's mouth. My sister was a drug addict and had become pregnant. When her son was 2, I took over custody, and just a few short years later, I brought him here with me. His name was Anthony, and he was only 4 years old when we moved here. The church prefers to move quietly when replacing priests, especially ones as well liked as Father Tom. There was no one to warn me about the lake. It took him. It took Anthony, didn't it? I whispered. It did. A tear slid down the priest's face. It was fall when we moved in. We hadn't had a chance to even meet the neighbors yet. We were just getting settled. I left the windows open one night when we slept. The breeze felt amazing. His cries woke me. I followed them to the lake with just enough time left to see what that monster did to him. Father Tanner was sobbing now, and I was breaking down right along with him. This thing has to be stopped. I hugged Father Tanner and whispered, "We're going to stop it. I promise." I let go of Father Tanner and turned to Susan. "Let's kill this son of a gun." Susan didn't speak, she only nodded. Things moved quickly after our moment in the kitchen. I woke Tommy up and introduced him to our new friend Father Tanner. They would be going into town for ice cream, a movie, and then to the church. Tommy was hesitant at first, but once he found out he'd be getting a kid's popcorn pack at the theater, he was sold. Meanwhile, Susan brought her rowboat out to the edge of the lake and began loading supplies. For the first time since all of this had begun, my heart lifted a little, thinking we may have found a way out. As I kissed Tommy's cheek and hugged him goodbye, the sun had begun to set. Susan put the crate of holy fire in the wooden boat with purpose. She kept a brave face through the day in front of me, but as the time for us to set out came closer, her face looked weary and worried. As I leaned over to peek into the fully loaded boat, my stomach dropped. There were more fireworks, the crate of holy fire cocktails, multiple lighters, Bics, Zippos, and the torch kind, a few boxes of matches, a couple flashlights, a rifle, and a handgun. The longer I stood there, the more sure I was that there was no way we'd be making it back. This rickety wooden boat was a death trap. When I finally looked up, Susan was staring at me. "You could stay here on the shore," she said softly. "A boy needs his mother. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't go. I have to try. For Tommy, and Sarah, Anthony, and Danny, and for you. Even if this doesn't work, thank you, Susan, for giving me more time with my son, and for trying." My voice waved, but this time I didn't cry. Susan nodded gently, it's time. We climbed into the boat and silently began to row. At first, I thought it was suspicious that the creature hadn't tried to stop us. I mulled the thought around in my brain. Was it afraid? Was it so sure we were going to fail it hadn't bothered? Or maybe it had concerned itself with another child and was completely unaware of what we were up to. Or maybe it was letting us come out to the lake intentionally to kill us far from shore, to wear our faces to take Tommy back from the priest and bring him back into the lake. The thought made me sick. I was so lost in my head, I hadn't noticed how far we'd come from the shore, nor the speckled light from the sunset reflecting off the ever-thickening oil shining on the water. A light splash a few yards from the boat and something moving out of the corner of my eye pulled me from my thoughts. My body tensed as I looked towards Susan for a sign of what to do. Susan had put down the rose and was quietly picking up a firework and a lighter. He's here, she whispered. We aren't far enough out yet for the holy fire. You row. Keep your eyes open. Tension weighed on my chest, nearly suffocating me. I tried to row smoothly, but my arms were shaking. Closer now than before, a child's small giggle came from the left side of the boat. Something round slowly began to sink back into the water. As Susan swung her flashlight towards it, a child's face from the nose up was visible. Dark hair, dark eyes, Danny. As he sunk down, the eyes turned up as if he was smiling under the waves. I froze. I couldn't row, couldn't scream. The reality that we came out here to die was slowly sinking in. My grip loosened on the rose. Had I not felt one starting to slide from the hand, being pulled gently by the waves, I may have been stuck there in fear forever. I rearranged my grip and began to row faster, smoother. There wasn't much further to go now. See the red float bobbing up ahead. Susan whispered, that's the center. That's where we need to be. I have a feeling things are about to. Susan's warning was cut off by a loud thump against the boat. The old thing tottered against the bump. The holy fire jars clanked against each other, but nothing had broken yet. I rowed faster now, powered by fear. Susan must have seen something behind us. She flicked on a lighter and lit up one of the fireworks. I hardly heard the thing scream behind us over my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The monster roller slammed against the boat again. Somehow, the boat held. We tottered hard to the left. Susan leaned hard towards the right, trying to level the boat. The red float was just a couple feet in front of us. For the first time, I looked over the side. The water we were floating on was completely black. One last hard slam from roller, and Susan flew back against the side. Fear flashed in her eyes. We were going to capsize. She gave me a hard, terrified look and pushed herself over. Susan, I grabbed a flashlight and searched the waters from the side she'd gone under, but there was nothing. Roller had her. The only thing I could do now was finish this. The black from the water moved and gathered in front of me. The tip of the boat gently nudged the float. The black tar climbed itself until it was a giant mound. It melted back into place until it formed a man. As it transformed, I took the opportunity to slide 2 holy fire jars between my feet and a Zippo hidden in my hand. When the tar finally took shape, a man stood on the water in front of me. His wild dark hair fell in front of his face. Light blue eyes peeked out curiously. His lips were black. Hello, Myra. His voice sounded like a not-so-distant cousin of a garbage disposal. Roller, I whispered. I seem to remember being called that a long time ago. His head tilted to the side, examining me, but they call me different names now. Monster, abomination. It doesn't matter though, really. The man in front of me sighed and looked over his shoulder. Susan finally popped up from under the water, gasping for air. Roller looked back towards me, unconcerned. I won't spare your son, Myra. I'll eat him, just like I've eaten the rest. You don't understand, can't understand. This hunger, eating children doesn't purify you, Roller. There's no salvation for something like you. I screamed. My heart was beating so fast I wasn't sure whether it or Roller would kill me first. Roller stared at me for a moment and let out an ear-splitting laugh. I said that so long ago I'd nearly forgotten. I never believed any of that, Myra. I was just hungry and I don't like to eat alone. The amusement left his eyes. Myra, his voice became childlike. He waited patiently for me to answer. Yes, What else was I supposed to say, faced with the monster? "I'm hungry," he whispered as he smiled. At first the smile of the lunatic, his grin quickly spread wider and wider, showing an unnatural number of teeth. "Roller," Susan screamed from behind him. As he swung his head around, I lit the holy fire and threw it as hard as I could. The glass shattered against the back of his head, and the lake lit up. Roller screamed and turned back towards me as I rowed frantically backwards. As he moved forward, I gave up on rowing and let my second jar. This time I hit him in the face as he squealed and melted into the lake. His face cycled through all the children he'd eaten through the years. First Danny, then Sarah, then a small child I could only imagine was Anthony. So many faces, so many children. His fiery outstretched hand touched the front of the boat as he sank. Somehow I knew he was dying. Even if this boat went up in flames and I burned or drowned, I'd saved my son. I'd won. I smiled, even as the flames gently danced on the tip of the boat. The fire on the lake had gone out. A wet hand slammed against the flames, and with it, my smugness left me. I stood and raised one of the guns and pointed it towards the edge of the boat. What the holy fire hadn't finished, maybe a rifle could. I took aim and waited for my head shot. Slowly, a mat of white, curly hair rose. I threw the gun down and screamed, "Susan!" I rushed to help pull her back into the boat, but it threatened to topple. "Just row, I'll hold on," she grunted. We made the long trip back the way we'd taken it out, in silence. Once my feet hit the edge, I sobbed and embraced Susan's wet, soft body, aside from a bit of swallowed stinky water, and a bit still sloshing in her ears. Susan was unharmed. In the morning, Father Tanner brought back Tommy, and we all had breakfast together. As I stared at all of the faces at the table in front of me eating happily, it almost felt like I had a family again. Tommy talked excitedly with a mouth full of eggs about the action movie he and Father Tanner had seen. Susan remarked about how rude it was to speak with your mouth full. I couldn't help but laugh. "Myra dear, can you pass the pancakes please?" Susan asked, eyes settling on me. "I'm just so hungry."